material over here, because last week we started the Yom Kippur War, obviously, which had two fronts. And you realize, as I said before, there's always a challenge for me with a group like this, because if you're speaking to the war college, you go into all the details. If you're speaking to people on the other end, anything you say is too much. And in the middle, to include the right amount and leave out the right amount is always kind of interesting for someone such as myself. But I tried to do that. Last week, there were two fronts. There was the northern front, in which Israel had to fight the Syrians, as we went to some length last week. And I'm not going to give more than one lecture to that. I took you through the week, and actually, after 6 or 7 or 8 days, the war there kind of ground to an end. So starting Yom Kippur, and it kind of, as they say, ground to an end, even though they were shooting each other, but it kind of stopped around Shmini Atzeres, late Simchas Torah. That's what it was. If we're old enough to remember those of us who are, you remember that whole season, the fighting wasn't over. But in Egypt, in the south, it was 2 weeks and more. It was a much more complex business and less inspiring story, perhaps I should say, because the war in the north, as I tried to describe it last week, it's actually a very heroic one. It's a shame that the soldiers got screwed over by the high-ups and there weren't enough men and tanks, and they always had to fight in outnumbered situations and without the right equipment and all the rest of it. But as I said, after taking the first very, very heavy set of blows, Israel came back. And although they lost a lot of men and tanks and all that, but they did drive out the Syrians. Let's get one thing straight. The Israelis did not win in the south, okay? And they did not drive the Egyptians out ever, till this day. The Egyptians will conquer a certain chelik, and they'll hold it, and get over it. And the war will end as it ended, and Israel will win like a certain sort of thing at the end, kind of. But it's not at all like it was in the north. In the north, it was a clear-cut victory for Israel at a price. In the south, it was not. And as I say before, as they gate us, we have to swallow this. In the long run, you and I, with the perspective now of 40 years, can say, all right, but it led to a peace. Okay? So that put the good spin on it. That is true. Not in any way did anyone foresaw. Certainly Israel didn't foresee it this way. Certainly Sadat did not foresee it this way. That's how the cookie crumbled in the end. So, and then you could say like this, was a happy ending in that particular regard. But as far as the war is concerned, Israel did not win as his own fault. And as I said before, we just have to get used to that. The reason I mention it is in 1,000 speeches, now and in the future, they'll always say, well, we won in the end. And they crossed the other side, which is true as we'll see, and they did this and that and the other. By the time it was over, we were about to, wipe out their army and all that. There's some truth there, but it never happened. So it's a serious business. So let me get down by way of an introduction over here. Let's see what the first thing we have. Okay, you have a sound? Let's go. This is Golda Meir announcing a surprise attack. This is Motzoi Yom Kippur. These are people in the bunker saying, help, what's happening? That's the Egyptians. They want a complete victory on this. It happened. Now, let's do the southern front tonight. Here we're talking about the Suez Canal. Okay? The Israeli border, Israel took over, as I think everybody knows, all this, entire Sinai, which means they're up to here. Here is already a body of water, not gigantic, but it's a body of water. Last year, those who were with me talked about the war of attrition, Mechamat Tasha, in which, Israel and Egypt kind of raided each other back over here. But here it's, cheek by jowl, right? The Suez Canal is not very wide, and one side were the Israelis. The Suez Canal is 110 miles long, right? I don't think people realize the dimensions over here. It's over 100 miles from here to there, okay? And it'd been out of commission since the Six-Day War. Agreed? They were stuck. Actually, there were a bunch of ships that were stuck in the middle of the war. They stayed, if you know this, Swedish ships and things like that. They had to stay there until the war was over and eventually got out, in 1973. But anyway, that's what it is. Let's go to the next one. Get it close. Get used to this, okay? Here, as you see, is Port Said. Here is Suez. Cairo, not so far away, about 70 miles away. That's the dimensions of what we're talking about over here. Notice that it's all not a canal exactly. Here's what they call the Bitter Lake, which should be important. It's a lake, okay? And a few other things like that. All this matters very well. That was the front. As we've seen, the Israeli army had allowed the Egyptians to build up to something like 500,000 men on their side, while the Israelis did not build up on theirs. That's what we talked about 2 weeks ago. That was the big error, okay? The IDF had allowed the Egyptians to literally build very high ramps, which gave them vision to what's happening on the Israeli side, but prevented the Israelis from seeing what's happening on the other side. So, on this side, the Israelis did not stop the Egyptians from building literally, engineering. A high thing, dirt on top of dirt, and then more and more and more, till it's a half mile high, whatever it is, higher than the Israelis. At the beginning, the Israelis matched them tit for tat, but eventually they didn't. That was a big mistake. Because it means, I can see you, you can't see me. You get it? If I'm Israeli looking on this side, I can't see past the wall. But you can look down on mine. So why did Israel allow them to do so? It's all part of this hubris that we've been speaking about over here. Now, this is where personalities begin to enter the picture in a way that didn't happen last week. I spoke about the problems that General Khofi and the others had, no question about it. But in the event, the way the North worked out, everybody kind of came together. You understand? It was a little problem here and there, but basically everybody came together, and the new guys that showed up cooperated with the old guys. They agreed on a general plan. Everybody followed through. That's what you got to do in war. In the South, unfortunately, it'd be a lot more complex than that, a lot more complex. First of all, you start with the problem that Ariel Sharon had just been, until July, the commander-in-chief in the South. So for a couple years, he'd been the guy in charge of the whole Israeli army on the Suez Canal front. And then they kind of retired him. You understand? Whatever you think of Sharon, which you can think this way and that way, he knew how to command the front. Now, as a general, he was. He has his issues, and the Gaiva, and this, and that, and the other dictator, all that is absolutely true. But if you want to know, like General Patton, was not a nice guy to have in a room, right? Not a nice guy, you wouldn't want to have him as a house guest. But in a certain time, in a certain place, he knew exactly what he's doing. So that's exactly who Sharon was. And he was into zrizas, as we say over here. He understood because he had a lot of experience in the battle. The guy never read a book. I want you to understand what we're talking about over here. The guy never read a book. But he learned all the war stuff from bottom up. He was wounded in 48. He learned how to crawl. He saw high and low matters. Then he realized cannon matter. He learned from the bottom up. So it doesn't matter. That's an excellent education of its own. You don't need to go to West Point. However, he understood, because he had a lot of battlefield experience with bullet shooting around you, what quickness, zrizas, is all about. Zrizas was an essential component of the official Israeli war plan that was called Shovach Yonim, which means dovecoat. And the idea over here was that Israel didn't want to, let's go back a little bit. Yeah, stop right there. Here's the Israelis, and here's the Egyptians, obviously. What if they attack? Israel always had to have a plan. What if the enemy attacks? Every army in the world has one, right? So especially over here. So what is the plan? What if the Egyptians cross? What is the plan? Now, you have several possibilities. Now, who am I to give armchair strategy? But I'm going to do it. He says, the right way to do this is you have a lot of mobile forces back here. So basically, you shouldn't have anybody over here. Does this work? Well, you get the idea. You shouldn't have anybody along that red line. Let them come over. As they come over, see where they land. You keep your guys back. And then you figure out what to do then and there, provided you have the tanks and the artillery and the stuff necessary to do so. That is one very classic way of handling things. That's how they did it. Another way, but that's flexible. That says they're going to land, they're going to get a mile in, maybe 2 miles. Meanwhile, we'll figure out what to do. We'll punch them back. We'll figure out how to drive them back or crush them in some other way. Another way is to say like this, not 1 inch. We want to yield an inch to the enemy, and we have to get that across, that if they try to cross, it won't do them any good whatsoever. And consequently, we have to kind of dig in like World War I style, and have a huge army entrenchments. Israel did like half and half. They made what you call the Bar-Lev line, which I'll talk about in a second. And the idea was, it's not one long trench, because imagine what a large army you'd need to do like World War I, to have a continuous Israeli army 110 miles. You know, it's not Russia over here, it's not China, it's Israel. We don't have anything like that. On the other hand, they didn't want to give in any inches. And so what they said was like this: they'll build in these little fortresses, ma'ozim they call it, bunkers, and fortified position along the canal. But you can't build them, you know, literally in a chain. We don't have enough men and enough power. It's not Israel. It's not United States of America, okay? And so they built a whole bunch, but they're like a half mile in between, right? It's not continuous. And the idea is, if the enemy side, you'll shoot at them from there, and those will provide like bases for the Israeli tanks to show up and shoot from there. And provided that you get there in time, then you can, from these fixed positions, shoot at the Egyptian tanks and rafts and junk like that as they cross over. But it's provided. What if you don't get there in time? And that's what happened. Okay, that's what happened. So if you don't get there in time, then the little forts are pointless, because you just go in the middle, in between. And that's what the Egyptians did. They didn't have to go and storm these bunkers and places, which were very well fortified, as I'll show you in a second. They said, you know, they were thinking smarter than that. Just go in between and go behind, and if you conquer the whole area, these guys will be like those Japanese soldiers, you know, at the end of World War II, 20 years later, you know, they're still holding out over there. It won't mean anything. So here was the big point. You've got to be in this rezus. Has to be the instant you hear anything or suspecting Egypt, you have all your forces in the right place at the right time, and the infantry and all the rest of it. And as I said before, a guy like Sharon could have pulled it off. If the Egyptians would have attacked, as the original plan was, as I told you, at Pesach time, instead of Yom Kippur, would be a different story. I'm convinced of that. I think many people, because Sharon knew what he's doing. You get it? And so then you have a different situation. I could play this scenario for you. You get the tanks there in time, they blow up the Egyptians as they're coming along, and then he would cross over to the other side. So this is a plan. However, because if you take a look, the Bar-Lev line is not a dumb idea. If you follow the plan that I just said, provided you have zrizas, provided you get there in time. These are all little forts, okay? As you see, they're not contiguous. So if you're Egypt, all you have to do is, you know, land, for example, between here and here. You see what I'm saying? In between the different places, and that's it. There's literally nobody there. The Bar-Lev line, let's go to the next one, is a complex of forts. There are roads behind. If you can sort of see over here, he said the road system, you see the lines, don't you? Along here, those kind of things. And those enable the Israelis to run tanks and trucks and stuff up and down. So it's well thought out. There's such a thing called the science of defensive warfare. You know, Israel didn't invent it. They've been around for a long time. And you have your front positions, you have your lateral roads, as they call them. You have to obviously have roads beforehand to get your guys to the right place at the right time. And Israel had all this sort of business. I can tell you right now, the Israelis believed in this very much. As you can see, this is called Kav Rishon, and then Muyash, and then Ta'oz, Kav Sheni. They're their front line of bunkers, and they had Ta'ozim, a second line of positions. The Israeli secular culture went over the top with this. Remember Naomi Shemer? Let's go to the next one. Remember Naomi Shemer, who wrote Yerushalayim Shel Zahav? She won from, of course, man, real Chiloni. Good person. I like the Yerushalayim Shel Zahav and some of these other songs. They were so drunk with victory in the 67 war that, I mean, I'm telling you this on Hanukkah night. He says that when they built the Bar-Lev line, she wrote a poem, which is supposed to be a children's poem to sing at the school, Ma'oz Tzur Yeshuati. I praised the Ma'oz on the Bar-Lev line. The Ma'oz is the bunker, right? The fortified position, right? L'cha no'el shabeach. Can you believe this? Okay? It's a song. If you want, you can go online and listen to it. And I remember the third stanza goes, I think you have it over here somewhere. Third stanza says something like, Bekrav ein kates tinatzeach. In an endless war, this will always be victorious. meaning the Bar-Lev line will see us through, endless, no war, no peace. And drunk with victory. I say this only because the good Lord has a sense of humor. I say that unfortunately because the Bar-Lev line crashed. You know what I mean? In other words, it wasn't Mos Sur Yeshua. It wasn't something that you could put your trust in. And the Chana Shabbat, but it tells you a mentality. It speaks to a state of mind, which we can understand over here. Now, as I told you before, the plan theoretically could work if everybody was on time, and I think Ariel Sharon would have pulled it off. So one of the big tragedies of the Yom Kippur War happened during Yom Kippur, not on Pesach or in Shavuos, because he left in July, and he was feeling there's going to be a war soon. He told Moshe Dayan, don't fire, keep me in for another term. But Dayan says, nothing to worry about, not going to be attacked. Now, I could be wrong, obviously. I could be wrong, because Sharon screwed up in some ways. And as far as I'm concerned, the most important of them, this is one that's always captured my imagination, is he did not maintain and improve the James Bond fire system that would have turned the Suez Canal into Dante's Inferno. This is one of my favorite. I'll tell you right now. Here's the Israeli mad scientist, General David Laskov. Good guy. He's born in Siberia, Russian Jew. I don't know how he got out of Stalin's Russia, one of the few people that got out. He's educated in Russia, Soviet Russia, engineer. He comes to Israel as a real idealist, in the 30s or something, and he eventually becomes, and he gets the first degree in the Technion or something like that, and he becomes eventually Israel's chief military scientist, the guy who thinks out of the box. It's like the James Bond movie, the guy that always makes him the funny weapon, because that's what he did. He made the funny weapons for the army, for the Mossad, and all this other kind of business. That is who he was. And here's one of his inventions and all that kind of thing. And they worked. Well, let me get this straight. So here's just a local Israeli guy that he made his own. So Israeli army and forces, they have stuff they buy from overseas, and they have some things that are made at home as well. So this guy, when Israel was on the Suez Canal, after 67, he said like this. This is a great idea. You put in a certain way, you build in pipes with the oil, and then you squeeze the oil into the Suez Canal at the right moment, and you light a match. And can it work? It can work. Now, there are problems with it, and the silt and all this, I don't understand it all. There are definitely technical problems with it. But I want to tell you something. Israel, with all their know-how, could overcome the technical problems if it was a priority. You see, if they said, we want to figure this out, they could do it. The generals, including Sharon, said, it's a James Bond, it's a Meshagas, it's this, that, and the other. The Egyptians were scared to death of it because they knew it could work. And just before the attack, they sent scuba divers to try to break the pipes and all this kind of business, which they were not able to do, but the Israelis had the pipes in such bad shape that they didn't work. Okay? Now, that, my friends, would have been some scene. 25,000 Egyptians come across. The guy goes, It's another Oz Yasher. You understand? Except this time would have been fire. Million sermons, my friend, would have been pronounced. So how come, Sharon wasn't classic military, they didn't think in these terms. I'll say it again, it could have worked, especially a high-tech country like Israel. It's just a matter of solving a certain technical problem. I can't, but he could. So I'm describing a military bureaucratic torpor, which allowed possibilities like these and others to wither on the vine. Okay? Wither on the vine. Could have used some good architectural engineering type guys, which Israel has, which we had. Okay? Which we had. Instead, Sharon was eased out, as they say, his role as Southern Commander in July 73. As I told you, he begged Dayan, reappoint me. I work a break NA soon. I feel it. I will need it. But Dayan says it's not going to happen. But the problem is that the guy they appointed in his place was not good. General Shmuel Gonen, a very unusual background. I'll show you something in a second. And the old story, the Peter principle, there are people who are good as brigade commanders and as this commander. You're not good for that commander. I don't think most of us understand, because why would we? I mean, a few people here in the audience I know have some military background, but most of us are civilians. The Army, you don't just appoint somebody as a colonel, as a general. You have to understand and have experience in moving people around. And the ability to command and move 10 people around is not identical with the ability to move 100 people around. So comes a battle, you don't know what to do. You put this guy here, this one here, that there. This is why you have careers, right? That little by little, you learn as time goes on. First you start as a lieutenant. It's not simply after 2 years you're a captain. You have to then learn the skills necessary to command a larger business, and then eventually the skills to a larger business. That's why a military career is 20, 30 years, till you get to the top. That's why you don't really, with the most unusual exceptions, have boy generals. Because they know what they're doing. You understand? There's a skill, okay? There's a skill. So the reason I mention is, this guy Shmuel Gennady was old school Israeli. All these generals at that time had come up in the ranks. But he was a very good combat commander in the Six-Day War and places like that, into the tanks. He's going to be totally over his depth, out of his depth in the Yom Kippur War, and they won't fire him. Okay. Now he's interesting. Is a Litvak from Vilna, born to a Haredi family, and they moved to Yerushalayim when he's 3 years old, and he learns in the Eitz Chaim Yeshiva, and then in the Hebron Yeshiva. This is not the typical profile for the what shall I say, IDF general career path. But of course, you learn yeshiva until you don't. A guy like this, when he's 14 years old, he's in the Haganah already, which goes to show you, his parents wanted him to go and finish TA, but he wanted to go and do other things. And so he goes and has a career like that, and Haganah rise in the ranks. I'll show you, I found something very interesting, because I've mentioned before that Israel has this program, This Is Your Life, Chaim Shekela, and they had Rav Goren's piece over there, and he knows this guy. They went to yeshiva together, except the Goren went this way and Gonen went that way, obviously. And they ask him in this, if you understand the Hebrew, it'll take a second. He says, what exactly is a yeshiva? This is an Israeli television. No. For a Chiloni audience, what exactly is a yeshiva? And he gives a very interesting explanation. He doesn't say it's a place for religious studies. It's a place where you have to think and ask questions or something like that. Let's take a look at this. That's General that's him. Mazeh Musag Yeshiva. What's a yeshiva? It's not a place simply to learn. How do you explain this? Place of intellectual seriousness. It's about talking and learning, Isaac Batoro. All right, so that's enough. He's trying to explain to a secular. This is 1972. The secular world in Israel knew less about the career than it does today because of the politics. It's a new world, and he's trying to explain to them the concept of Torah Lishma. There's no tests. You just learn for the sake of learning. Like, what is that? But I'm simply telling you, you couldn't ask this question to Moshe Dayan or Ariel Sharon or any of these other guys because they come from a completely different background. But that doesn't mean that it's a good general. You understand? As I said before, let's go to the next one. They're generals and they're generals. You understand? For example, let's be very specific. Patton was a very good general of an army. He couldn't command the whole D-Day. That was above his base skill. Eisenhower, think what it took to reach the level to command 3 million men. Think about what I'm saying. You understand? Like just the organization to put that together. So I'm simply saying a guy can be a good general, like General Patton, but that doesn't mean do you have the skills of an officer. You need, if you have a front commander, as they call it over here, they're going to need somebody big with big skills and big experience and big capacities, and not just somebody who's a good general. Stam. In addition to this General Gonen was a martinet. It's very interesting. There are principals and there are principals of schools. Some run the place by constantly knassing everybody and penalizing everybody and going to the rule book all the time and infractions. And then others have like a charisma. You get it? And he wasn't from the first type. When in his divisions, the people hated him because every little thing, he got him in trouble. And, if your tie's out of shape, it's $10 fine, and you can end up in jail for stupid things. There are different personalities, and there are different ways of doing it, and there are different types of generalship, just like there are different types of leadership and teachership and principalship and all the rest of it. But it wasn't a good mix for a front commander. Now, it makes things even worse. Until then, he was under Sharon. So when the war comes and Sharon will be under him, it's a bad situation. Okay? Because what happened was Ariel Sharon, when he retired, because that's what happened, in July, just before the Yom Kippur War, retired, Dayan made him a general of the reserves. Look, he certainly was capable of that. But that means if it comes to a war, which it will very quickly, then they're going to bring up huge reserve divisions. So yesterday I was your boss, and today I'm your subordinate. That takes a very delicate personality to make that work. Agreed? You know, if you can pull that off, that speaks very nicely about the top and the bottom person. But Sharon wasn't that type of guy, and Gonay wasn't that type of guy. Now, ordinarily, this is just chit-chat and gossip. No, people's lives will be affected by what I'm talking about. You understand? This is part of the screw-up of Israel, I'm sorry to say. You had these personality situations, which you did not have in the north, as I described last week. To make matters even messier, the minute Ariel Sharon resigned or was retired in July, he plunged into politics against Golda Meir's regime. The election in Israel was supposed to be in right after Yom Kippur. Israel had an election in '69 when Golda Meir came in, and it's 4 years later, it's 1973. Comes out, the original plan was the election was supposed to be October. Of course, when the war happened, they were pushed back to December. That's what happened. The elections will eventually be December. But meanwhile, it's supposed to be October. So July, August, September, October. He was out of the army in July. He immediately planned to run. And he is the guy who, the minute he left office, he created the Likud party. He created the Likud party, not Menachem Begin. Okay? He basically wanted to take over even on top of Begin, if you know what happened, even though you're looking back at silly. But a lot of things Sharon did was silly, a lot of things he did with genius. It was a combination of silly plus genius. And here you have, therefore, a political component to all this, because when the war happens and Sharon will say, I want to do this, that, and the other generals in Golda Meir say, well, this is a politics, you know. Maybe he's just grandstanding. And second of all, if it's going to be a victory, I'd rather have a labor general running it than a Likud general. Sad. Okay? Now this is what happens. Okay, now that we have a partial cast of characters, here we go. At 2 o'clock, Shabbos afternoon, on Yom Kippur, the Egyptians suddenly launched an air force and massive artillery attack along the Suez Canal. For whatever reason, as we've talked about at great length, Israel was unprepared. They were surprised. So it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and they bombed the heck out of the poor Israeli GIs in those bunkers over there. So all of a sudden, out of nowhere, boom, 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 all over the place like crazy. Now the bunkers could take it. They're very well built. You know, they say the Bar-Lev line is junk on it. It's not true. It's actually constructed very well. But it didn't matter in the larger picture. At 2:15, the Egyptians start crossing tens of thousands of soldiers in rafts. Hear what I said? It's a 110-mile front. So there are tens of thousands of soldiers. They have practiced doing this hundreds of times. I repeat, they had practiced this hundreds of times, and these Egyptian soldiers land. They climb up the sand barriers on the Israeli side. They bypass the Israeli forts, and they rush inland a mile to seize the tank ramps from which the Israeli tanks were going to shoot at them. See, they could look down, I told you. So when they were looking down, they could see a mile away and beyond, and this is the place where the Israeli tanks are going to be, so go chop them before the Israelis can come there, and that's what they do. Okay? By 5:30 in the afternoon, that's 3.5 hours later, the Egyptians have established a beachhead 1 mile deep, 5 miles wide. Okay? That is a long business for the whole Suez Canal. By 6 o'clock, they've set up bridges across the Suez Canal, and they're throwing in tanks, armored personnel carriers, infantry, all in large numbers. So it's their D-Day. That's what it is. How many losses do the Egyptians have in this whole operation? 250. I'm just trying to show you. They pulled it off. By 8:30 Saturday night, oh my God. Whoa. The place is coming across. It's like the Germans must have felt when Eisenhower started pouring in all these men. As I indicated 2 weeks ago, the Israelis had thought, thanks to their information from the super spy, from Ashraf Marwan, that the Egyptian attack would take place at 6 in the evening, not at 2 in the afternoon. That was the information they had. As a result, the Israeli tanks were not at the ramps at 2, which they should have been. Had they been there then and started shooting at the Egyptian rafts, it would have been sitting ducks, because they were well positioned, those ramps. Okay, they had fortifications around them. It's good if you use them at the right time. So everything depended on timing, as I kept saying it before. Tonight. Everything depends on the timing. The Israelis not there in time, so it was no good. To make matters worse, General Gonain, we just talked about, who was the commander of his whole front, does not really believe there's going to be an attack today. And he tells his generals that there is information that's going to be attacked today, but I don't believe it. Indeed, he tells the generals, don't send your tanks there too early, because the sudden appearance of a large number of Israeli tanks might provoke the Egyptians to launch a war. Can you believe that? Okay? And so, here's the general. As you can read what it says over here. They say the Egyptians will open fire at 2. What does that mean? The top general is talking to Mendler, the general under him. Is this the end of the exercise? Because Egypt had what they thought was a maneuver. It's just an exercise. Is it opening fire, relaunching a war of attrition, maybe a full-scale invasion? But that seems unlikely to me. This is a few hours before the attack, when they already had information that the attack is going to be today. So I tell you again, the state of mind is everything. And you can't tell me, don't you see what's in front of your face? It doesn't work like that. You and I have the luxury of hindsight. History is about talking about what the mistakes of dead men, as they say. But they were living then at that time, and it was a confusion. So halavai, they would have seen it the way we see it today. But I'm trying to show you that they didn't. So this is just an unbelievable situation. So the Israeli tanks got there around 3:30, something like that. Too late. Because I told you by 2:30 or so, 2:45, they'd already gotten a mile inland and taken the ramps. By then, thousands and thousands of Egyptian infantry are already on the ramps with their saggers and their RPGs. In other words, with their anti-tank weapons that you can hold personally. And the saggers, which is the Russian stuff, they work at 2 miles. They can blow up a tank at 2 miles away. So the Israeli tanks rushing are mowed down. So Israel not only doesn't get there in time, but they lose a ton of tanks the first day from the stupid business that I just described. And they don't know what's happening. They get close. 2 miles away is a long way. They get as they approach the ramps, all of a sudden, boom. What happened? Boom. We have the records of this. They'll say, what happened? Boom. You see? And it was a complete defeat. The Soviets had practiced this with the Egyptians hundreds of times, and it worked like a charm. The Israelis, who are used to winning, go into a severe psychological shock. Look at this. You see Ariel Sharon, later years, saying that I came there and they said, we don't know what's happening. We're losing. We don't know how to beat them. Look at this. Israel never faced this before. Not in 48, not in 56, not in 67, not in the war of attrition. Look what's happening. They don't have that, ability on that day to shift mentally into a different mode of thinking. This goes on till nightfall. So Yom Kippur, second half of Yom Kippur in Israel in 1973 on the Southern Front was one big bummer. Just as I said, there was no redeeming quality to it whatsoever. The Israeli army was unprepared for this, and they failed to immediately reassess their tactics of stopping the Egyptians mamish at the canal. Okay? So, the old line, right? They used to keep doing. No, they charged and they got blown up. So they said, well, line up the new ones coming and charge and get blown up again. And they did it a third time and a fourth time. Well, what's the point? You understand? What's the point? And so, again, I'm sorry this happened. By nightfall, certainly by Sunday morning, the Egyptians have set up a hornet's nest all along the canal. Okay? So, as I say, a mile inland or so forth, maybe someplace 2 miles inland. The Egyptians dug in. This was the genius of their plan. Don't go too far. Don't go to Tel Aviv. Don't even go into the Sinai. Just go into the area where you're covered by your own artillery on the other side of the canal and those SAM-6 missile business that'll stop the Israeli Air Force from bombing you. And just dig in and let the stupid Israelis attack you, which they're ready for because they got all these thousands of bazookas and RPGs and saggers and all the rest of it. So I say poor Israeli bunkers. They are a whole story I'm not going to talk about tonight because it'll take too much time. But they're doomed. But I know that, and you know that. If you're Israeli, especially if you're a good general like Sharon, you say, how can you leave our men behind? And hear me well, a lot of these bunkers were so well built, the Egyptians could not storm them. Okay, when they came close, they had defenses and things like that. The Egyptians said, okay, big deal, just wait them out, which is what they did. So some places they were able to storm them and kill everybody inside, and there are all these stories that you can read about if you're interested in that. And other places heroically held out, say after guys got wounded, and there's a whole mess in each place. But in the overall strategic picture, they're a pain in the neck because Israel will spend the next several days, the whole week, trying to rescue them. Every time they rescue them, they get shot up. That's the wrong thing to do. So, but General Gonain has this attitude, we can't give in any of our fortifications and our bunkers, and we don't want to say the plan was wrong. And like I told you before, that's Albert Einstein told you that's the wrong way to go. And therefore, a lot of people died for no point, just trying to rescue these out. Now there are heroic stories on an individual level that are remarkable that I just don't have the time to go into, in which an Israeli group will get in there a few tanks and they'll fight their way through and get these guys out, especially the wounded ones, and bring them back. And they are personally heroic stories, and they're inspiring in that particular sense. But you understand what I'm saying. In the bigger picture, it's a waste of time. So they shouldn't have had him there in the first place if this is the way it was going to turn out. Of course, they didn't know it was going to turn out that way. So, where is it going? If the Israeli army does, by nightfall, as I said before, by Sunday morning, the Egyptians have set up this hornet's nest. On the other hand, the Israeli army isn't totally dead. The Egyptians land all kind of commando units all the way in the rear. Lots of them. Helicopters drop a bunch of commandos here, over there. And the Israeli army still has daring. And they fight off, they usually kill almost all these commandos, and the ones they don't, they chase them off. Throughout the night, the Israeli reserves are rushing to the front, but they're often intercepted by Egyptian commandos. This is all part of the Egyptian plan, which was a good plan, I'm sorry to say. So here you have a relatively small number of forces facing them. The idea was if war happens, you bring in the reserves from Israel. It goes across the Negev, across the Sinai. They have roads to bring up to the front. The Egyptians will land like in a movie. I'm sure the Egyptians have movies about this. A commando group in the middle of the Sinai with the mission that if Israeli convoy comes, blow them up or delay them or something like that. And so it's just a giant mess. By 7 o'clock that night, which is Sunday night, General Elazar Dado, the commander-in-chief of the army, realizes this is going to have to be something we never had before, which is a defensive war. It can be done, but something the IDF has never faced. 48 was not a defensive war. 56 was not a defensive war. 67 was not a defensive war. And even the war of attrition was partially defensive war, primarily was the offensive war in the sense of the raids that I talked about last week. This is mamish a defensive war, where you have to hold back the enemy. We're not going to be able to do so. Now, this is not exactly accurate. The Israelis think that the plan of Egypt is to go deeper into the desert. They didn't know what you and I know now, which is they're going to go 5 miles and stop, which was a smart idea. They thought they're going to go to the Mitla passes, as you can sort of see over here, in the back, 10, 20 miles. They're going to try to take other areas in the rear. In reality, Egyptians will sit where they are. They'll fortify and fortify. They're protected from the Israeli Air Force by SAM-6 missiles, which they have hundreds of. And the Sagers, RPGs, protect them from the Israeli tanks. If the IDF wants to attack them frontally and slug it out, fine, we can sustain more losses than you. And if Egypt stays put, it wins. This is the great strategy of General Shazli. He was a smart guy, and this is a plan. Everything I just told you worked, okay? Now, worse, the Israeli commander, General Gonain, who is still in Beersheba, he says, if I'm far in the rear, I can get a better reports. So he says, in Beersheba, far from the front, he doesn't understand what I just told you. He is determined that we can still carry out Shavach Yonim, the Dovecote original plan, which is out of date. He will hurl men and tanks, he gives by the phone, he orders attacks at the Egyptians, and the Egyptians will always repel them, the Israelis with heavy losses. So it was the wrong, whatever. Now, it's a catastrophe when the commander of the troops is out of touch with the reality. General Gonain orders the men in the bunkers to hold till relieved. Everything I'm telling you is the wrong move. You get it? So the guy in charge was the wrong guy. He made the wrong decisions. Okay? It makes no sense in the new reality. I mean, the bunkers have been bypassed. The Egyptians are only holding thousands of men, hundreds of thousands of men in the rear. So what's the point of the bunkers? Okay? The minute the Egyptians bypassed the bunkers, they were a reality, a liability from many ways, as you understand. But he didn't see it that way, and as he should be. This is where the Israeli forward headquarters were, what's called Khashiba, where they had it's like the U.S. Strategic Command. They dug into the mountain. You know what I mean? They dug into the rocks. That was the forward command. That's where you should be. It's close to the front and see what's going on. He's back in Beersheba over there. It doesn't come to Khashiba till another day or so. So the guy who's the actual commander of the troops on the ground, General Albert Mendler, who doesn't have his over guy there, he's far behind, he's confused, he's paralyzed, he can't grasp the new reality. See, they needed, that's what I told you before, if you have a guy like Sharon with experience, or Bar-Lev or somebody with experience, he would say, do this, move here, all the rest of it. But the guy in charge is way back there, and he's giving orders that make no sense. The General Elazar, the commander-in-chief of the army, needs to fire and replace the top guys now. If you know anything about the United States in World War II, one of the reasons, there are a number of reasons, but one of the reasons that we won the war, not the only reason, but one of the important reasons we won the war, was General Marshall fired people right and left all through the war. Anytime a general screwed up, you look it up. The guy was all of a sudden sent back to the States. Sometimes they give him a promotion, sometimes they give him a side thing, but there's a lot of generals, I could give you a whole bunch of names, that it didn't work, gone. You understand? Because Marshall had been in the First World War, and he saw what screwball generals can do. Therefore, he said, my main job as Chief of Staff of the United States Army is get rid of the deadwood. That was a famous statement of his. You understand? Now, Israel, they need to operate in the same mode, but every country has its own culture. Every country has its own culture, and the IDF has its own culture. They couldn't do that. All right? So General Elazar does not replace this guy, doesn't fire him. So, okay, as in the north, the reservists do not start arriving at the Suez Canal front until late Motzei Shabbos and early Sunday morning. Takes a while. By Sunday morning, the Egyptians have 100,000 soldiers and 400 tanks across the canal. The Israeli reserves have not been told the situation. Hear what I said? The guys coming to the front, they think it's a small business. They don't realize they're running into the Russian army. The Egyptians have 100,000 soldiers. General Gonain himself is in the dark. Now, the Israelis were bringing up two big reserve divisions. They had reserves, okay? And two big reserve tank divisions under two big generals. There's Sharon, of course, who just got, as I told you, just had quitted, but it was in the reserves. And now General Adan, Avram Adan. These are experienced commanders with the tank business. You know, they fought in 56, they fought in 67. You know, they know what they're doing. They'll be deployed in the following manner. Now, I'm not going to get too technical because then I'll lose everybody. But just keep a general idea, which is, here's the front. General Adan is in the north, if you can see it, where I'm pointing to, or I'm trying to, right? With this sort of thing. Who's got one of those manual businesses here? Yeah, right. He says, but there's Adan is in the north, General Sharon is in the south, and General Kalman Magain, who was one of the other generals, he's in there. That's how they divided up the front. So keep that in mind, that there's not one person, I mean, Gonain's in charge of everything, but there wasn't one person exactly holding the whole business. It's three different Israeli armies trying to hold a 110-mile front, as I said before. So as I said before, I don't want to get you too technical over here, but keep it in mind. On Sunday, these guys who come up close will hear the cries for help from the bunkers, which I told you will lead them to try to rescue them. It's not the right type of warfare for armored divisions. The armored division is supposed to be like this. You get all the tanks together, and you punch through wherever you decide to punch through. And hopefully, it should make sense where you're punching through. Don't do it in a place where it doesn't make sense. Here, what they end up doing all day long, and again, they're heroic stories. All day long, you send 2 tanks here, 4 tanks there, 5 tanks there, and usually they don't make it. And if they do, they come back with losses. And anyway, it's not the right use in a larger picture for fighting a war. That's not how you do it. All right. So Sunday's a waste. So we've done Saturday and we've done Sunday. Meanwhile, the Egyptians reinforce and reinforce. So it's going to be impossibly costly to take them on. That's the Egyptian plan. By Monday, so we did Saturday, Sunday. Now Monday, General Gunin sees the problem, but he's confident that if you have a powerful two-division attack, at the same time, this will break the Egyptians. Sharon is also confident of the might of an IDF armored blow. That's stupid. It's not 1967. The Egyptians are tough, and as I told you before, they've been a hornet's nest. You understand? I mean, they had trenches, tanks dug in all over the place, more border position, machine gun things. It's like the Marines at Tarawa, and Iwo Jima. That's what you're facing over there. They had dug in like crazy, barbed wire all over the place. You can't just say, "Oh, we'll have a very powerful attack, and we'll do it." So what happens? The attack fails miserably. So Sharon and Adon. General Adon attacks first in the north, as you saw on that map, and gets a bloody nose. But he doesn't make this clear to General Gunin, the commander, who sends Sharon to attack the southern front. So the northern isn't working, so he should send him to help the north. But instead he sends him to the south because he thinks everything's okay in the north. But then he hears about it and he calls off the attack, which leaves Sharon all miffed, like, I thought I was supposed to do this, what's going on over here? The Egyptians are elated by the repulse of General Adon. They go on the offensive. So instead of turning out a day when Israel is attacking Egypt, it becomes a day when Egypt is attacking Israel. But Sharon hits them hard and bloodies their nose. So by the end of the day, they're where they started. So that's not how the battle was supposed to go. Because you didn't get anything, you lost a lot of men. The Egyptians lost a lot of men. They can afford it. We cannot afford it. You know that. We can't afford it. So this is not, I'm not describing a well thought out, planned exercise in which you rationally calculate what's the right way to go and all the rest of it. Everything's too cop. Everything's a response to the position on hand. You can't do that in a war. Okay? This is on Tuesday and Wednesday. So we did Sunday, we did Saturday, Sunday, we did Monday. Now comes Tuesday and Wednesday, the days in between Yom Kippur and Chol HaMoed. The Egyptians again, with large force, attack the Israelis, who hold them back. So that's what's happening on Tuesday and Wednesday. But again, it's a big loss on both sides, so we can't take that. What did we gain by holding the Egyptians back? I mean, it's good they held them back from breaking into deeper inside, but we didn't gain anything positive from this. This is not what the IDF is all about. It cannot do a bloody attrition war. First of all, Jewish lives are precious. Secondly, more importantly perhaps, Israel relies on its mystique. Israel relies on its mystique. Why did Ashraf Marwan call the Mossad? Because he read the books and he said, this is the closest thing to James Bond in the world. It isn't, but that's what they believe. You get it? It's a myth, but it's very. The IDF, the Israeli army, is the best tank thing in the world, the best air force in the world. It isn't, but it's good the other one thinks that. The Jews are clever beyond belief, and they come up with insidious things in the battle. It's not true, but it's good that you believe it. So in 56, Israel pulled it off. It looked like they were actually doing it. In 67, they pulled it off. It looks like even though maybe the world said, wow. But now if you see, I can take them, and they bloody my nose, I can bloody their nose. Then all the rest of the Arab world and the rest of the Muslim world say, like this, good, then this looks like something we can do. We're joining. So what happens if Egypt gets reinforced by 1 million men from Algeria, from Libya, from Tunisia, from Saudi Arabia, from Yemen, from Indonesia, from Malaysia, from Pakistan? You know what I'm talking about. There's a whole world out there. This is Israel's nightmare. You understand? They can't handle such a thing. It's the shark smelling the blood. So this is what really Israel is panicked about, and we know this from the discussions that the generals and the politicians are having back in Tel Aviv. The loss of mystique frightens what they call the board, the Pentagon over there. How are you going to explain to the world, which doesn't know this yet? What I'm telling you, believe it or not, was not known to Nixon and Kissinger. They thought the Israelis were winning. How are you going to tell the world that the IDF is actually being defeated by the Egyptians in a fair fight? The military, the government, cannot bring themselves to do so. And remember, Israel's still fighting in the north. So it was not fun to be Golda Meir on Tuesday, on Wednesday. It was not fun. General Elazar tries to put a brave front, but it became more stupid than anything else. He made a famous speech where he said, don't worry about it, we'll break their bones. Nakel Sam and Shabet Atamot. Look at this, you know. We will continue to attack them, we'll continue to smash them, we'll continue to break their bones. I can't tell you how long it'll take. I get it, but it was a lie. And if you're an Israeli soldier, this is more important. In the southern front, you just got your head handed to you in the fighting in that day, and you hear this, then the Israeli soldiers say the bitter joke of the first half of the Yom Kippur War, which is, we have exchanged roles. The Egyptians have learned from us how to fight, and we have learned from the Egyptians how to lie. Because the Egyptians were always famous, the Arabs are losing, so we're winning. This ain't exactly great for the morale of the fighting men. Moshe Dayan goes into depression. At first, he tries to hide it over here, and you'll see. Talking about the northern front. He said, the Egyptians poked in a little here and there, nothing special, nothing to worry about. At that particular moment, they had overrun half the whole southern Golan and all the rest of it, trying to put, and he even says like this, Nakel tam shok al yarech, right? We will smite them hip and thigh. That's when Israel was being, so he's trying to put up a front. But after repeated defeats by the Egyptians, Dayan can no longer put up a good front, and when he speaks to the Israeli public, you can see that he's crushed. You understand? Take a look at this. He says sober words. We're now at a war which is not like 67 at all. It's a hard war full of blood. Bloody war. If you're a mother, and that's your Moshe Dayan in Israel, do not deceive yourself, this is going to be an easy war. There won't be an elegant victory this time. The war is going to be long term. And we can do it, but it'll be long. So in other words, when Moshe Dayan makes that speech, everybody freaks out. So they bring up General Yariv, who'd been the head of military intelligence, who was a much more stable guy. But he tells it to him, in a normal way. He said, listen, this is going to take a while, and it can be done, like I'm talking to you now. It can be done. It's not going to be pushed. I don't say it's going to be easy. We can win in the end, but, bal naflig, don't drive yourself into imagination. It's going to be an easy run. It's going to be the opposite of that. So get the public ready for what's happening over here. Moshe Dayan combines anxiety with extremism. In the cabinet, or when he's alone with Golda Meir, it's like this. We're going down, so let's use the A-bomb. Okay? Basically, you might say he had a certain breakdown. A serious, he pulled himself together. But when you get the news that I've been describing to you, and I'm just giving a lecture over here, when he's having the real-time news that I've been describing, we lost there, 100 tanks here, 200 there, 1,000 men here, and all that. So, it's this world crashing down around him, you understand? So, as far as he understands it, which was wrong, as far as he understands it, the Egyptians are about to break through, and there's nothing between them and Tel Aviv. Okay? So the only thing we can do, Israel has to go to plan B and blow them up. We have to nuke Cairo or something like that. And Golda Meir was a lot calmer, and she's like, you're crazy, calm down, go home, This ain't World War III yet. And let's put it this way, get a hold of yourself. In many respects, as far as Golda Meir is concerned, and I'm not a big fan of hers, in a number of respects, this was her finest hour. Even though the government screwed up, as I've described, and they should have, would have, could have, had the men there in time, all that is true. But when push came to shove, and the war broke out, and all this news came in, and it must have been very tough for her to get all the casualties, she's the one who had a level head, and when this one blew apart, she said, just calm down and take it easy and go home, get a rest. And no, we're not going to do the A-bomb. Yes, we are going to do this. Let's talk normal over here. What's an actual military plan? They were talking about getting volunteers from America to join the army. They were really thinking in desperate terms. You understand? All that is okay, but let's be very practical as much as we can do. General Elazar, also the chief of staff to Ramat, the commander-in-chief of the army, he also was very calm. He said, listen, we can do it. It'll take time. First, we got to win in the north, okay? Got to think logically over here. In a time of trouble, you have to think logically. First, we do the north. We've started doing that. Once we finish in the north and we drive the Syrians out of the Golan Heights and inflict defeat them over there, then we'll move men to the south. I don't say it's going, like I said before, it's not going to be easy. Maybe this won't be the war of 6 days. Maybe it'll be a war of 6 months. Who knows? And I'm fully aware of the possibilities of the Arabs coming in from all over the place. We will handle this with a brain instead of a emotion, one day at a time, and let's do it. We have to keep the sharks away, like I said before, all the other Arabs and Muslims. But he doesn't have a plan how to breach the hornet's nest. And he's honest enough to say that. He said, I don't know exactly what we're going to do, because the Egyptians are dug in over here, and you can't get them with the planes, and so I don't know what to do yet. Okay? I don't know what to do yet. We will hopefully figure something out. But let's not deceive ourselves and think grandiosely or go the other direction and say the sky is falling like Chicken Little or something like that. It's got to be done one step at a time, okay? That's in headquarters. But in the battlefield, General Sharon and Gonain and Adan start what they call the Milchemet Generalim, which you can just imagine, who's blaming who, okay? This is there's an internet site, a Wikipedia site on Milchemet Generalim. You understand? Notice it's so well known in Israel that they give the whole details about all the rest, all the ugly details. Basically, why did we lose yesterday? Sharon says, all your fault. And Adnan says, no, you didn't back me up. And this one says, and Gonain says, you're all wrong. And they say to Gonain, you're stupid. And when I say you're stupid, this is happening in front of the media, right? Because each one of these generals, especially Sharon, has what you call his journalistic friends. So this is what they're publishing in the Israeli newspapers, and oh my God, all right? Now, the world is confused. They don't know what you and I know. We're talking about Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, the days between Yom Kippur and Sukkot. Nixon is calling up Golda Meir, says, let's go, you're winning, right? And Golda Meir said, well, we're winning, but I'll talk to you about it a little bit later when I have some time. You understand? And by the way, Golda Meir even had an idea, and she said to Kissinger, she said, maybe I'll fly to America to make an appeal for direct aid. And Kissinger said, are you crazy? That'll be totally a sign Israel's on its knees and totally scared. And then the Arabs will definitely run in, which was true, okay? So Golda says to Nixon and Kissinger, the Russians are pouring in weapons like crazy. What's America going to do? Kissinger said, look, I don't know, but we're not going to send any U.S. personnel. We're trying to get out of Vietnam. This is 1973. We were pulling out very hard from the Vietnam, and the Congress was in a crazy mood. You know that. You're old enough, many of you, to remember that. The United States was not getting involved in another war. Thank you very much. Okay? That's exactly what they need. If you recall, when Moshe Dayan took over the day before the Six-Day War broke out, and he gave his famous first press conference, what was the first thing he said? I want to make clear, I don't want American and British boys to come here any fighting. We don't need any help like that. Israel can handle itself. And Johnson's like this, woo, thank God, got enough trouble with the Vietnam, okay? So we can't do it over here. Golda Meir says, so what can you do? What they work at is like this. Nixon says, listen, you can send El Al planes quietly. They can load them up with whatever you can find. We'll give you all the weapons that'll fit in the El Al planes. You can send Israeli pirates here quietly, and they can fly out the Phantoms. Just don't talk about it, okay? But that I'll let you do, because that way it's like still or hate and all the rest of it, and keep it secret. That's something, but it's not enough, because the Russians are pouring in oodles, okay? In the midst of all this, I said before, Golda Meir and General Elazar had to hold their heads because everybody else isn't. So here we are on Thursday, the first day of Sukkot. Some week in the Sinai Desert, right? Here we are on Thursday, first day of Sukkot. On the Golan, what's happening is the Musa Pellet offensive that I talked about last time, when the Israelis are finally driving at great cost the Syrians out of the Golan Heights. In the Sinai Desert, it's the two armies evenly matched, which is bad for Israel, because as we know, as I said 100 times today, the Israeli army was really trained for a blitzkrieg, not for this kind of war. Right? Not trained for this kind of war. So what do? The only answer they could come up with was, can you figure some way to cross into Egypt, to do to them what they did into you? Is this a possibility? Okay? You can see the general idea behind it, even if my thing doesn't work. But if Israel somehow are able to break into the other side, maybe they can, in a perfect world, drive all the way around and block off the Egyptian armies on the Israeli side and cut them off from their supplies, and that would force them to capitulate. Even if that's a Napoleonic kind of solution. You dream about that. But even if they don't, the fact that Israel have guys on their side will freak them out and show that we're not totally winning either. And you could even do more than that. If Israel lands troops on the other side, it's not easy to pull off, okay, as you'll see. But if they can do that, maybe we can destroy their SAM missile sites from back. And once you do that, you have a hole in the sky, and then the Israeli Air Force can come in, and finally you have a war in which Israel is backed up by its own Air Force, which has lost 70 or 80 planes already, and can't afford to do anything wrong. They need to get rid of these missile things so that they can go in and finally go into Egypt and cause damage there. You know, these are possibilities that suggest themselves, okay? But it's easier said than done. How do you do that? How do you cross an army onto the other side? Do you have bridges? The United States of America was not able to do Day until June 1944, mainly because they didn't have the boats. You know your history? Didn't have the logistics. It took so and so many personnel carriers, to cross over, like you see in the movies on Omaha Beach, and so many things, the type of thing that can transport the tanks. The logistics is very important. So how the heck do you build a bridge across? I mean, it sounds great, in a comic book. How do you do that to get something that, an army can cross with its equipment onto the other side? Okay, now the story develops in dramatic fashion in two stages. From Yom Kippur to Sukkot, the bunkers have been holding out, as I told you. It was dumb to order them to stay, but that's what General Gonain did, as he didn't want to give up an inch. This led to the manifestation of the IDF ethos of constantly trying to save them, to reinforce them, because that's who we are. Even today, to Israel in the middle of the worst wars, will go in like Hadar Golden, right? They'll go in anywhere and take risks that they shouldn't take from a military point of view to bring back a body. Kal v'chomer, a live person, okay? So Americans are Americans, and Russians are Russians, and Israelis are Israelis. It's just get over it. When we hear there are guys suffering the other side, they're going to do it. You understand? They're going to do it. They can't do like the Japanese, like Hitler, just write them off. We're not built that way. So they've been going over and over again, sending, especially at night, tanks and groups of soldiers come and try to rescue people in the bunkers and bring them back. Okay? That's who we are. By the way, Ariel Sharon was very big on this. Again, I don't have the time to go into one by one, but it's amazing. He's talking to all the bunkers, and he's actually talking very nicely. He said, I know you're in a bad situation, like I'm speaking to you in a very nice tone of voice. And we're going to try to do the best we can. How many people you have? They have talking codes that Egyptians shouldn't listen, So he said, how many Gemaras do you have? And things like that. So, which means that the food, ammunition, and calm down. And I know it's in a tough spot. And if you think you can't hold out, it's okay. You can give it. He's very good at this sort of thing, because on the battlefield he was very good. When Mamash on the battlefield. But what's the big picture? There comes a fateful Tuesday night rescue mission. Okay? Meaning Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, right? So on Tuesday night of that, every night they're sending in soldiers. There's a guy, Brum. Okay? There's a guy, Yoav Brum, who leads a mission over here to try to rescue a group, eventually gets killed. And what does he do? When he sneaks in to find one of these bunkers, he says, wait a minute, there's a gap in the Egyptian lines. I didn't notice this. They never would have found it if he wasn't trying to do the rescue mission, which turns out it was a good idea, but who knew? You get what I'm saying? When he came in to find the thing over there, as you see, he said, wait a minute, the Egyptians are like a half a mile away. There's nothing in between, immediately north of the Bitter Lake. Don't tell anybody. I mean, don't tell them. And so what he does is, as you can see over here, let's go to the next one. There's the right here. Right this area over here, right? North of the Bitter Lake, he sees that this big fight is going on over here. I mean, there's this gap is going on. It's the end of the line of the Egyptian Second Army. The Israelis would never have discovered this gap if not for the rescue mission. So here I am criticizing all these rescue missions. You never know how the good Lord makes things work. Now, Sharon immediately says like this, boy, it's a gap. Let's cross into Africa now. Now. General Gonain and Elazar, they say, no, it's too dangerous at this point. Sharon says, the heck with that. Yeah, he uses worse language. He says, the heck with that, just attack. Because it's a pattern, you know. If you see an opportunity, you go for it. These guys like this. You can't just go with a few men. You know, then Egyptians will close and finish anybody off. Seichel. Now it's a battle between this and that. Okay? General Elazar said like this, this whole situation in the south is bad. I see Sharon's going to do whatever he wants. It's going to be a disaster. We need a clear chain command in the south. Without a commander who's always screaming and shrieking, because Sharon is screaming at Gonain, and Gonain is screaming at Sharon, and so forth. I don't want to fire a guy in the middle of the war. And so let's do something else, okay? Let's do something else. And of course, let's put it this way. What he does is, he said, I'm going to bring in a higher general, Bar-Lev, who used to be the head of the whole army, so he's a better general. And I mean, he used to be commander-in-chief of the army. If the two people are willing to cooperate, it can work. In the Civil War, General Meade was commanding the Army of Potomac. It wasn't working out. And so Abraham Lincoln appointed Ulysses Grant, commander-in-chief, top dog of the whole business. Grant and Meade knew each other, and he said, like Grant said, and Grant said like this, I'm just here to advise. You be the commander of the army. And they worked, that's how it is. In 1864 and 1865, the famous campaigns which ended the Civil War, Grant was just there to advise. He would say to Meade, I would recommend that you attack over here. Meade would give the orders, and everybody was happy. When the war was over, Grant became the president, Meade became a higher general, and everybody said, if it works out, it won't work out in Israel. You understand? It won't work out. So this is the problem. As I said before, Gonain isn't built that way. Let's go to the next one, okay? And he's going to feel very bad with General Bar-Lev, who's up there on the left, being the, what should I say, your monitor. I'm sure in the bureaucracy they have good words for this, you know, so work supervisor, whatever, something like that. What can I say? It doesn't matter. It's happening. The General Elazar calls the South and he says, get over it. This is happening. If you want to leave, you can leave. But if you don't want to leave, then you have to agree to do what Meade did to Grant. Okay? General Bar-Lev is the antithesis in personality of General Gonain. He's very calm. He's famous in Israel for this. Measured, you know, think this through. After all, you didn't rise to the top. Stamazai. Get it? He used to be the Ramatkal. He used to be chief of the whole business. You got to have a little bit of brains and a personality, too, to make this happen. And he's authorized to fire anybody on the spot. So what I'm saying is, they call General Bar-Lev, who had been retired now for 2 years, and they said, but he's still around 50 years old, that's all. And he says, if you remember last week, they actually sent him to the north to do this. But then he says, it's working in the north, we don't need you. Come to the south and do this in the south. I give you carte blanche. Use your head, don't be stupid, but I give you carte blanche. And if Sharon doesn't listen, fire him. But this is not Pashut, because Sharon has his own journalists. That's where he's done, you know, reporting from the front line. And they're giving his version of the story. And it's not so easy to fire somebody. It'll cause a firestorm in Israel, in the rear, in the middle of a war. But he tries to make it happen. So this is why I keep coming back to the machlokas of personalities, which muddy the southern fighting, unfortunately, in the Yom Kippur War. The history of warfare is composed of this. That's what makes it interesting to people like me. because people like me are interested in the personalities that take place in the war. And you see some people have it, right? They have it, and that means that they have the charisma that people just listen to them. And there's never any problem with the chain of command. We have great generals of that sort. And they have the other type. And usually, Israel have been lucky until now. In 73, they weren't so lucky, as you see over here. By Tuesday night, so again, it's Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. By Tuesday night, the Israelis have lost hundreds of tanks. The Air Force has lost 70 planes. You know, they can't handle that. The Air Force is even worse. What, they have like 150, 250 planes. 70 is a third in a few days. Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, they lost a third in 2 days. They can't handle that. And if Israel doesn't have the Air Force, oy vey. All right? So what happens? General Barlev and Elaz are the top guys. They say, before we make another move in the south, let's just start a new policy. The new policy is like this. Think. Okay? No margin for error. We've lost too much. Can't afford to lose any more planes in a stupid thing. Can't afford to lose any more tanks in a stupid way. We just don't have it anymore. You understand? We've used up our margin. So whatever we're going to do now, this is Tuesday. Whatever we're going to do now, we're not going to move until we calculate this and use, thought. They're skeptical about crossing into Africa, into Egypt. What if the Egyptians just slug it out like Stalingrad from the canal to Cairo? The IDF is not the Red Army, which, by the way, Sadat was willing to do. So suppose they land on the other side and they try to go to Cairo, and every road is another roadblock, and you have to fight your way through there, and you're losing men, and then you get to Cairo. Cairo is a city of 10 million people. What the heck is the IDF going to do when they get to Cairo? I mean, you tell me. Does anybody think of that? What's the plan? You get it? What's the plan? There's millions and millions of them all over the place. It sounds great. Go to the enemy capital. Really? Because the Israeli army take up in New York City? What is going on over here? All right? As long as the Egyptians remain dug in under protection of their SAM missiles, their tanks, their artillery, their RPGs, and all the other stuff, the IDF cannot defeat them. Get over it. This is a sobering realization. But Bar-Lev said like this, so let's be sober. Sharon's patent-like admonitions are not viewed as realistic. It's a tough first days of Sukkot, because it's Thursday, Friday, is already Sukkot. The gap is tempting, that gap in the line to go through, but how realistic is it? Okay? So you see kind of like where it is, just north of the water, the lake in the middle, immediately north of that. Let me explain. The lake was not defended on the Egyptian side, but the lake is too wide to be bridged, so it's no good. It's all logistics and engineering, those kind of guys. Israel doesn't have that kind of business. It's enough for them to build a bridge just across the narrow canal. That's a feat, okay? We're not dealing over here, as I said before, with the United States Army at its peak. The Americans could do that. Right? The Americans could do that. The Israelis can't do that. And so you have to find a place where it's narrow, immediately north of the lake, to break through. I hope you understand what I said. By Shabbos Chol HaMoed, the Musa Pellet offensive in the north has run out of steam, as I told you last week. They drove the Syrians out of the Golan Heights. They went into Syria. They busted them a little bit, but they got busted by the Syrians. The Iraqis are now showing up, and everything that I talked about last week is happening. Situation in the south has been bad since Yom Kippur. There's a blue mood in the Israeli Pentagon. It was on this Shabbos, I would say, that the morale reached its nadir in the Israeli High Command. It was no Zman Simcha Seinu. Golda Meir visited, she looked like, death warmed over, and the general, look at them up there, the pictures of them, in the bar. Because all they're getting is bad news. But President Assad in Syria does not know this. He didn't know the hindsight any better than we did. He thinks that the Musa Pellet offensive is going to reach Damascus, because it was only a few miles away. And that would expose Assad as a weakling. In other words, it's true they could turn Damascus into a Stalingrad, but he doesn't think that way. Because as a macho, if they get into my capital, I started by attacking Israel, they get my capital, he's a dictator with no legitimacy. If he's exposed as someone who's a complete boob in the military sense, and the Israelis can reach the capital, his own people will overthrow him. You follow? It's not like Egypt, which is a much more stable. Egypt is mamash a country. It's been a country for thousands of years. Syria is not a country. So they can't afford these kind of blows. This will be fatal to a tyrant like Assad. So Assad and Kosygin from the Soviet Union go to Sadat in Egypt, and they say, you got to attack in the Sinai to relieve the pressure on the Syrians. It's just like Stalin and Churchill in the Second World War when they kept saying we need a second front. We need a second front. That's exactly what happened. And Sadat figures, I got to give in to them. He must agree. After all, he owes one to Syria. I told you last week, the Syrians were supposed to attack at 6 in the morning, and then they would have won the first day. But because they compromised with Egypt, they started at 2 in the afternoon, which cost Syria its success. So you guys in Egypt caused us this. You owe us a payback, 1 for 1. And anyway, the Israeli army had not appeared to be so strong as originally feared, Sadat sees. Maybe Egypt can advance to the passes. That would really be something. If Egypt could get as far as the Mitla Pass, as you see on your right, that would be mamish, a major achievement, and Sadat would look like the greatest hero in Egyptian history, which he would be if he could pull that off. Whew. So now we get to our denouement as we come to the end. Sadat feels he has to agree, as I told you before. General Shazli, who was the smart Egyptian general, he's all opposed for the correct reasons. Listen, everything we did so far worked. Don't play with the plan. We moved in, we set up a hornet's nest. Don't go beyond that, and we can't lose. Okay? But he's overruled. Baruch Hashem. Okay? By General Ismail, you see up there, and Sadat. When the Israelis get word that the Egyptians are going to launch an old-fashioned attack on the Israeli lines, is a hallelujah. It really was. They start screaming and whistling and things like this. They were delighted. There's a euphoria. This is Shabbos Chol Hamoed. Why? An attack by Egyptian tanks, that's the kind of battle we know how to do. And the Imamish went, Me'yagan la'afela, me'shib la'oro, me'afela or there was the mood transformed itself immediately in the Israeli high command. They said, this is something we know what to do. For a change, the IDF is going to be ready, not taken by surprise. They know where the Egyptians are going to attack, and they know how many tanks is going to be there, so they can mamish plan. I told you, think. So they can plan, and they coordinate their armor, they get their artillery ready, they even get the commandos ready. The Israelis send a commando group to make a movie of this into Egypt to mess up their rear communications. There's quite a lot of little stories I can't go into. Look how long it takes just to bare bones business. The Egyptians attack, and are badly defeated. They lose 300 tanks, 300 tanks, and hundreds more of armored personnel. Because the Israelis win an old-fashioned victory. My friends, I just talked to you about the first Israeli victory of the Southern Front in the Yom Kippur War. Didn't happen the whole week from Yom Kippur to Shabbos Chol Hamoed, and it took place like a day or two after Shabbos Chol Hamoed. So for 6, 7, 8 days, Israel was getting beaten. They didn't get an old-fashioned, regular Stam victory until like 8 days, 9 days into the war. Okay? This was a psychological breakthrough for Israel. It's a real Chol Hamoed. As Bar-Lev calls Golda Meir, what does he say? He said, we've returned to ourselves, and the Egyptians returned to themselves. Now that's a lie. It wasn't true. They're going to learn this in the future. I won't have time to do this tonight. Israel thinks, now we started to win, the Egyptians will crumble. The Egyptians will not crumble anywhere, ever, during the Yom Kippur War. Okay? You cannot underestimate them, and there'll be a lot of terrible fighting going on. But at least Israel sees that we can win. Okay? Now what do? Cross into Africa, go into Egypt. At the seam, that little gap that I told you about before. Brum had spotted that guy. Israeli soldiers have reconnoitered it. The United States of America, the U-2s, gave Israel the information also. Nixon told them, was it the NSA or something? Tell Israel where the gap is. What they found on their own, but the Americans could show it to them. But now you have to think. What's the purpose of crossing into Africa? To go to Cairo, 70 miles away, 5 miles away? So Sharon said, yeah, like I told you, going to Cairo, that's glorious. But that doesn't make sense. Is it to eliminate the SAM missile sites? Well, if you ask the commander of the Israeli Air Force, General Pellet, yeah, that's the main goal, okay? Is it to cut off the Egyptians on the eastern side of the canal? That would be pretty good if you could pull off a Napoleonic stroke like that. Look over here. Eventually, Israel will get here. Eventually. So look how they totally cut off that group at the bottom. You get it? By the time the war's over, see how it is? That red thing at the bottom, that's the Third Army, the Egyptian Third Army. By the time the war was over, Israel was in a position to totally cut them off. So that would mean 100,000 Egyptians would surrender. That'd be a blow that the Arabs couldn't even handle. Okay? So that's already, as I said before, that's a Napoleonic masterstroke, if you can pull that off. But how to do it? The lake, the Bitter Lake, which doesn't have troops, can be crossed by infantry on boats, but it's too wide to put a bridge across and things like that. And that's what you need if Israel's going to effectively penetrate by sending in tanks. So how exactly do you cross? Not here, but right there, right? But it's only half a mile. It's a little less than half a mile gap. Okay, only a little less than half a mile gap. So what do? Israel will have to cross a narrower spot. There's a small gap, as I told you before, but it's 800 yards. It's not even half a mile. It's too narrow. It will not be safe for the Israelis to cross. And if the Israelis build bridges there, the Egyptians very close by will be able to myrtleize them, as they used to say, with enfilade fire. You know, you cross over here and they can shoot at you and blow you up over here. Accordingly, it will be necessary to widen the gap by attacking the Egyptian army positions beyond that half mile. I hope you understand what I just said. Okay, you have to widen that gap, but that's tough. This is so-called, where the Egyptians are located, the southern part where they're going to have to attack, that's what the Israelis call the Chinese farm. If you ever heard of it, Chavasinit. Now, really, that's racism. It was some Japanese thing that had invested there some years before, but the Israelis see some Oriental signs, so it's the Chinese farm, yeah. But it doesn't matter. That's how it goes down in our history, the Chavasinit. There'll be big, bloody battles there, which I won't be able to get into tonight. It's not Pashut. It'll mean bloody fighting to expand the gap. But if successful, the widened gap will enable the tanks to cross and to start inflict real damage on the Egyptians for the first time since the war started. Okay? So, as you can see over here, let's go to the next map. I think you get the general idea. See what on the left-hand side, Krava Chavasinit. Do you notice this? This is where the big battles will be immediately north of the lake. Because if you can take that over, then it makes it wide enough for Israel to cross over there, and then they'll be able to go like that and go like that, up. But once you break through, then it's the Blitzkrieg dream. So we're talking about three tasks as I conclude tonight, because that's as far as I can get. Number one, crossing infantry onto the other side, commandos first, to start inflicting damage on the Egyptians and hopefully blow up some SAM missile sites in order to facilitate the Israeli Air Force to seriously bomb the Egyptians. Get that? So that you can cross in the lake. And that's what Israel will do. I'll tell you next week. They have the commandos will go in rafts across the lake and start to cause trouble. Number two, you have to take a bridge or bridges to the gaps, head it up and rush tanks and armored divisions to be able to hit the enemy. Where does Israel have bridges? No country would sell Israel military bridges. Israel was an aggressor. So they wouldn't send them out, because Israel won the 60 war, got up to the Suez Canal. So no country said, I'm not going to help you invade Egypt. You see? So Israel had to buy unifloats in England over the years, which are civilian things they use in harbor. You know what that is? In harbors, how do you move goods around? Like in Baltimore City. How do you move tractors and stuff from one place to the other? You put them on these floats, you get enough of them, and they're pontoons or whatever, and it's a matter of weight. You get enough of them, it can transport anything. 9 of these can do a tank. You have what they call the Gilboa bridges, which is over there on the upper right-hand side, which are French, I think, and they work in that way. And Israel itself, that General Laskov, the mad scientist, he created what they call Gesher Galileum, right? He created his own kind of business, you see, that you can transport it across the desert, but it's going to be very hard to do it. Then you set that up, you rush tanks on the other side, and then you hit the enemy. And then finally, they have to conquer the hornet's nest of the Chinese farm. Here, the Israelis have no idea of how powerfully entrenched the Egyptian army is there. The Israelis will get a very bloody nose trying to conquer this position, which is crawling with tanks and RPGs and Sagers and camouflage machine gun nests. Like I say, it's like Iwo Jima. It's like the poor Marines had to go, in Okinawa. It was just a tough business. And America, by the way, was shocked by the losses in World War II in Iwo Jima. Remember that? This country was shocked by that. So Israel can't afford to lose 5,000 men. Think about that, taking a position in that, right? Is the prize worth it? Is the prize worth it? Well, yes, if it will result in Israeli victory, maybe. Maybe. This is something we'll have to do next time. It was turning out to be quite a Chol HaMoed and quite a Simchas Torah, a holiday season that would be covered in blood. That was the Simchas Torah, the Shmini Atzeres of 1973. That's what we're invoking tonight. and it will draw in outsiders, because as the war drags on, and will almost lead to World War III. I don't know if you know this or not, but America and Russia got in such a quarrel over this war, they took it up to close to nuclear war. And Nixon was half drunk at that time anyway with the Watergate, so he was ready to push the button. You get it? It's quite a story. Okay, it'll bring it almost to World War III until it works itself out. That is something we've run out of time. We'll have to do next week. Stay tuned. Good night, good Vach, good Hanukkah, and there we go.